All right. So, tonight what we're going to do is we're going to discuss a little bit about consumer credit. It's not a whole lot different than some of the things we were talking about last week, but one thing I kind of want to get into, and this is just sort of gets into basic kind of personal finance education kind of stuff. When you're, believe me, the stock market, you can't really outguess what's going to happen in the stock market. You could know that something bad in the economy is going to happen tomorrow, and the stock market will go up. Because what will happen is smart analysts, smart people already knew that. They knew it was going to be bad, and it probably wasn't as bad as what they thought, and then boom, the market goes the other direction. So it's really frustrating when you're trying to pick stocks, trying to figure out what's going on in the economy, because there's so many people involved in it. So many of them are pretty smart and have better access to and more access to information than we have. So it's really difficult in terms of market timing. The other thing that's prudent for most investors is what they call dollar cost averaging, where you don't try and necessarily time the market, and let's just say you're going to put in $100 a month into whatever mutual fund or whatever you're going to do, and that will kind of even things out over time. And really that's what you're doing if you're, for most of you, that your involvement in the stock market and mutual funds will probably be in a nature like that, because you'll probably be doing it through your company. You'll probably be building up your 401k or whatever each year. So, again, the limits on it, let's just go with say $20,000. And again, the reason that's the maximum that you could put in as an individual into your individual retirement account. And so probably not right now, but once you get to a point where, say, you're making like $100,000, and you're obviously going to be putting something towards savings, retirement, especially if there's a matching part of it, you'll probably want to max that out in the 401k portion of your savings, because the 401k, 403b, or those types of programs are tax deferred. So it means, although you're going to pay taxes on it at some point later, you're deferring that paying of the taxes until hopefully in your retirement age. Well, it's going to have to be 59.5 is when you start taking withdrawals. But anyway, you probably won't be working, and it'll probably be your sole source of income is living off that, maybe some retirement money in there. But for most of you, it's probably going to be off your savings, and at that point, the tax bite won't be as bad. But anyway, what I have right here is just some numbers, and you're probably thinking, why does it seem like the economy's not really surging along when the actual unemployment rate is 4.9%? I mean, how can that be? And 4.9% is getting pretty close to full employment. There's always going to be people in transition, people going from one job to another job. That's going to count for a couple 3%. And when they're saying 4.9, I mean, that's very, very low. And you would think that everybody would have work, and the economy would be booming, and that's not necessarily the case. You can also see that the numbers are a little cyclical. The way they've got this graph depicted, makes things look a little bit more extreme. The top edge of the scale is only 11%, and the bottom is down around 2%. But anyway, they're showing right now at about 4.9%. And one of the reasons, though, that you would think that maybe it's a little worse than that is the way they actually calculate the numbers. So here is the thing called the labor force participation rate, which the way they count the numbers, they have different U6, U3 numbers. Anyway, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they have different numbers that they calculate. And the U3 number is the one that's normally read out to you, and that would be that 4.9%. But there's people that, believe it or not, because they're not looking for work actively, they drop out of the calculation. And that doesn't mean that they're just not calculated. It means that the way they actually do the calculation, that it actually lowers the unemployment rate artificially. It's not that more people are necessarily working, but it means that the greater pool, the greater universe of people that are out there that could potentially be unemployed, if they're not participating, then they're not shown. So anyway, it's basically, you could call them like frustrated, unemployed, or whatever. They're people that are kind of giving up to a certain extent. And there's also people that are underemployed. There's people that would like to be working full-time, but maybe they can't get that gig. Or they're working at McDonald's and got a college degree. Not very likely. The other thing, too, is for you all, it's sad to, point the finger at the other guys and say it's their problem, but as a college graduate, which you'll all be here, within some period of time, your unemployment rate is a point or two lower. You're almost at full employment. And then if you pursue maybe an advanced degree, it drops even further. So generally, it's you won't have those sorts of issues. But just the same, you're living in that economy with a lot of people that are going to have problems. So anyway, on that labor force participation rate, yeah, people have looked in the last 4 weeks for any number of reasons. And this was when it was at 5.3. It's now 4.9. Anyway, the number is quite high. Now, in this case, they're going to labor force participation rate. So what they're saying is that high number there is over 66% of the population is in the labor force. And now we're looking at historically low, 62.9, 62 point something or other, which is not a good overall situation. So what this chart basically shows is the labor force part. Well, this is the actual unemployment rate. Now it's creeping down. But when the labor force participation rate, if it were normalized, you'd be looking at unemployment rates up to about 11%, just by factoring back in the number of people who have fallen out of the pool that aren't really being registered. So it makes numbers more difficult. And again, everything's political, especially in an election year. So, it's you could go to, in fact, I'll listen to different sources, and I can kind of infer what's going on in the news by what they don't talk about. You know what I mean? If they're talking about how low the unemployment rate is, that means that the labor force participation rate must be pretty bad this year. Or whatever, vice versa. It depends which side of the political spectrum they're coming from. And both sides do it to a certain extent, but anyway, you have to, as a news consumer, you have to cross-check your sources now quite a bit more. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there because we're talking about general economic forces at work. For those of you who are in the stock market, yeah, this is a brutal time, but again, it comes and goes. You do have other options, but I would not say, as we learned last week, looking at some of the savings rates and things like that, that may not necessarily be one of them. But potentially, real estate is again, though in Alaska, that's kind of a desperate situation as well. So we'll see what plays out, but it'll all bounce back. It'll be fine. Learning objectives. So consumer credit, differentiate between types of credit ratings, which you may or may not know. Creditors look for when they're giving you credit mistakes and laws that protect you. So we talked just a little bit about some of the banking stuff last week. I actually looked at the actual numbers and pulled up the regs, so we'll be able to clarify that in terms of what's covered under credit cards, debit cards. But it's largely what we talked about, but we'll be able to give it absolute numbers now. So credit is not, a bad thing. In fact, in credit for a home, if you aren't using credit, you really put yourself at a disadvantage. Somebody who's going to save, and pay cash for their first home, well, first off, it's not very realistic. And secondly, it's going to delay your purchase of that home, and it's going to subject you to what it's just, when you're taking credit for an appreciating asset, that's like a business expense. That's like a cost of doing business. That's something you want to be involved in. Consumer credit, that's for personal needs. So, again, it's a useful tool. It's something you definitely need to I would think to function in society. You have to have some sort of credit, some sort of credit card, but you definitely don't want to abuse it. And if you do have a credit card, use it smartly, you can actually, it is smart financially. If you're paying off the balance every month, you're actually not paying those interest rates. It's only when you let that balance lapse that you run into problems. But there's other things involved with it. So anyway, it's an open market out there. They're talking about ways to finance purchases. So pull it out of your savings, use your present earnings, borrow against expected future income. So anyway, draw it out of their savings. If you just have cash sitting there, well, maybe that's a good point. But I usually have money tied up. I don't have, free cash out there available. If I did, I would move it into some sort of investment with depending on, my risk assessment. It doesn't have to be. I mean, there are funds out there, there are bonds, there's things like that where you can be guaranteed a certain rate of return. But just to have it holding in cash is not a smart idea. We talked about that. Using your present earnings, if they're substantial enough, if you have, that excess available, and then borrow against expected future income, which is normally the credit. So obviously, nothing's free. There's always trade-offs. And in the consumer credit, there's so much money involved, so much money to be made that, the reason why, if you're a smart consumer and you're using your credit cards wisely, is you can get some good deals, is because you're you're not the norm. The norm is somebody's going to run up their credit cards and have this kind of lingering balance and pay exorbitant fees and not really do the math or catch up to it. If people bought things on credit and saw the true price they're going to pay for it, if they just make the minimum payments, they probably wouldn't do it. You know what I mean? People who want a stereo and it's like $500-$600, they're like, oh yeah, maybe I should do that. Well, if they know it's going to be like $1,200-$1,300 by the time they, leave it on the credit card for a while, they might not do it. So anyway, because of that money that's made, it's, there's some power out there. Misuses, yeah, cash for a down payment, if it's that type of thing. Most of the time, most situations, you're putting all out there on the credit. Savings for the purchase, maybe not an option. Maybe you want to do, especially like on that Mint program, we're talking about that, where there's, specific things where you're putting money into a cash account to save up for, some luxury item, maybe a snow machine or something like that. That might be a smart way to do it. But even me, I would probably put it still in some sort of short-term investment until I got to that goal and say, 12, 15 months, whatever it takes. Does the purchase fit my budget? And is there, could I use credit in some better way? So, again, if you are going to use credit, if you are going to be carrying a balance, make sure that it's in the most economical method possible. And if it's like, say, something like a snow machine may not be the best example, but certainly there's more attractive finance programs than putting on a credit card. There's, we'll talk about open and closed credit. Open credit is like a credit card where the balance, you pay a little bit in and you take a little bit out, and there's no defined terms. Closed credit is like a car loan, or maybe like a snow machine loan, where you're going to pay it off over 4 years, and you're going to pay such and such per month, and you can't borrow more money out of that account. And when you finish your payments, you're done. Your loan's finished. That's closed-end credit. Misuses, postponing the purchase. It's funny, that guy with the hands, from the video, he talks about wait, do it another time. Sometimes, you can, but, if the dishwasher blows up or whatever, the water heater, you're not waiting. If it's your vehicle and you're going to lose your job if you can't get to work, you got to do what you got to do. And if it's medical, and a lot of times too, situations like that, some of those dire situations are what, kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's like, there was an earthquake in, where was it, Taiwan or whatever? I think it was a 6 point whatever. Yeah, and how many thousands of people killed? I mean, we get a 7.1 up here, and I don't think we lost anybody. It's like when there's an earthquake in Haiti. Maybe this is a bad analogy, but some of these places that are teetering on survival, if your finances are teetering on survival and the car breaks, that's going to be, you can handle some adversity if you're squared away, but if you're already in, living paycheck to paycheck, any little emergency is going to push you over the top. So, how did that relate? But it does. So postpone it if you can, within limits. Psychological costs, I do know people who feel better when they go out and blow some money. And it's like, eat chocolate and run after credit card and do all that kind of stuff. If you're one of those people, do something else, because that is just a bad habit. And actually, again, if you get involved in saving money and saving properly, hopefully you'll get kind of a rush from that, and you will also get kind of a disappointing feeling when you're having to pay for something by credit card versus having to pay for it by cash. But anyway, there are people out there who do sort of therapy shopping. It's probably not a great way to do it. Advantage using goods and services. So, it does get you through. For a lot of people, it just kind of provides some stability. Like I say, everything I basically buy in a week typically goes on a credit card, but I do that more for accounting purposes, to accrue miles, and just for simplicity. I don't like the change in my pocket. So you can also use it as a cushion for financial emergencies, which is a smart use of credit. That means, though, that if you got a $15,000 balance on your credit, or a $15,000 limit on your credit card, you can't have it at $12,000. You need to have obviously some space on that credit card, some open balance, or open whatever limit to put that money into. Advanced sales, sometimes you're just using some of the store credit cards, and some places like Kohl's or some of those places, if you go in there and comparison shop, they're kind of pricey. I mean, everything in there is meant to be sold kind of with some discount here, a discount there. If you go in there and pay the full price, you are paying literally more than the other stores, but nobody does. Everybody's got their Kohl's card, everybody's got their bonus, everything. So, and certain stores will send you advanced sales. Returning merchandise, it's just dead easy. You walk in, they put it back on the card, you walk out. It depends on the store, but somebody like Lowe's is just phenomenal. And it is convenient. So, now, again, those are some of the advantages, but the big advantage is when I think of using credit smartly, it's for the home mortgage thing. Because, again, if you're going to be getting ahead in financially, I don't see, unless you've got a very mobile lifestyle where you're going to be moving all the time, owning property, owning your own home, just because of the tax benefits involved in it, the building of the equity, it's just ridiculously low credit, and the ability with a fairly safe asset. It's not like you're borrowing money for stocks. That's leveraging, and when that stock price goes down, you have to. In stocks, what happens is, let's say you want to buy stocks on some account, and you buy $30,000 worth of stock, and you put down, say, some percentage, maybe $7,500, 25% down, and the collateral is actually in that equity. When the stock price goes down, so goes your collateral, and so that's when the stockbroker calls you and says, you need to come up with some more money because your collateral. Anyway, and then if you can't match it, they sell your stock for you, and you get clobbered. So anyway, people who borrow money for stocks, leveraging like that, that's a dangerous speculative position. But in real estate, it's completely normal, because if real estate prices drop by 3 or 5% in Anchorage, which they might do, people will absolutely be screaming. Stock market's gone down like 3 or 5% this week, and people are whining, but it's just certainly not unheard of. Real estate is much more stable. So anyway, it's smart to use credit for real estate. Other advantages of credit, so the monthly payment, safer than cash. If you want to, I had to rent a car today for a trip going to Hungary. I mean, if you don't have a credit card, you're out of luck. They're not renting you a car. By the way, I got it through Hotwire or whatever. I don't know if you guys ever use that, but in Hungary it's like $17 a day for a rental car. In Atlanta I get them for like $7. Anyway, if you don't have a credit card, if you're a cash customer, you're going to have to walk up there day of, and you're going to be paying $80, $90 for that car. And then they don't even really want to give it to you because they don't have anything to put damages on. So if you don't have a credit card, you're going to have a tough time getting hotels, car reservations, all those things. Which, if you're trying to do that as a college student, you don't have a credit card, it makes it tougher. Float time, grace period. So I talked about that just a little bit, where you're kind of using their money for free. If you ring up $4,000 worth of charges on that credit card, but you pay it off within the limits of the card, you give them their $4,000 back and there's no interest. Now you let it go a month, now you're starting to pay interest, and you're paying pretty good interest, 14% or something. The interest rates on credit cards are quite high. That's why if you do have a huge balance on a credit card, you pretty much need to, own up to it, call somebody who we'll talk about and talk to them about getting like a debt consolidation loan. Taking it off that open-ended credit card, putting it on a fixed loan, coming up with some monthly payments at a much lower interest rate, you get it paid off quicker. And like I say, it's in their best interest. People default on credit cards, but they prefer that not happen, so they will kind of lean forward to help you out to prevent that. Airline, miles, rebates, all the rest of that. So we know about that. Indicates financial stability. Don't get carried away with that. Like we talked about, people, I've got an American Express, whatever. I don't even know what they're proud of. I used to know, but now I don't even care. I mean, it's just silly because especially American Express and some of these higher status cards, they have annual or usually annual fees. And then they also have the thing where they're not a true credit card. Some of these elite ones where you actually have to pay off the balance every month, so it's not really even a credit card. But anyway, for me, I find one or two good cards and I keep them. Now, if somebody sends me something in the mail and it is a stupid good idea or no credit for 180 days, I may take it up on it. But that actually, in my theory, kind of squelches that because they go, man, this guy's just taking advantage of it. We're not sending him any more mail. So anyway, so other things about it, the checking overdraft protection though, you need to have some sort of protection on your checking account. Again, different banks have different policies, but for most of them, if you have some sort of Visa, MasterCard with them and you happen to overdraft, it's not a big deal. They just roll it onto the credit card. They don't even send you a nasty gram or anything. If you just have a cash account and you overdraft it, I mean, you've broken the law, really. I mean, if they want to get snooty about it, and they'll certainly charge you for overdrafts, and we've probably all done it one way or another. And sometimes it's not even your own fault. If somebody gives me a check and it ends up being a hot check, a check that bounces, that ripples into my account. Now I've added that to my balance. I thought it was good. And boom, now all of a sudden I'm the one with the hot checks. And I can't go back after that person. I could try, but it would be more trouble than it's worth. So anyway, most of the time you will want to have some sort of, you want to have some sort of overdraft protection. And it's usually easily to be done with that credit card. Any inputs on that from banking, financial? No?
Definitely in your benefit to do have an overdraft protection. There's still a fee.
Yeah.
But it's minimal as compared to an overdraft fee, which is upwards of $25 per item.
Yeah, USA, those guys, they don't actually do that to me. They don't hit me with because I've done this once or twice before, and that's not teaching personal finance, right? No, but it was one of these things where I was given a check by it was actually insurance reimbursement, and they realized they made an error on the check, and before they called me, they canceled the check. It's like, damn. And I've got checks rippling. And then I had some buffoonery with, you don't work for Northrim, do you? First National. Good. Anyway, that's why I moved on from Northrim. What I was doing with them was I had a business and a personal account. And I would have money in my personal account, in my business account, because somebody wrote me a check for some equipment. I transfer to my personal account and send it off to Visa, who I buy all the panels. I buy all the panels with a credit card. It's not a smart business move, but I pay it off every month, and I need the miles. So anyway, but Northrim would not post my transfer until the next day, even though it looked good on the computer. They hit me with a charge when the check went out to Visa. So I'm like, no, this is not right. they refunded the money, but I'm just like, I don't want to have to walk in here and explain this to you every time, so I just quit. And then I went to another bank who does do it like that. So anyway, it's you'll find the different idiosyncrasies of different banks, and again, from your homework assignment. One thing on the homework, I got through all of the online folks this week in terms of what's been handed in. And again, the same thing still stands. You have to have the homework in by the first exam, so nobody's late at this point. But the only kind of, I wouldn't say it's a trend, but there was a couple folks who, they weren't realizing, on some of the interest problems that you do have to use a chart or some sort of calculator because it's compound interest. If I say, 5% interest on something, that if you're just saying, oh, that's $105, no, it's not quite that simple. That's, playing words, that's simple interest. What we're talking about in financial transactions and credit and the rest of that is compound interest, which makes it a more difficult calculation. But don't worry, because there's all sorts of calculators out there. There's tables, there's online calculators, there's financial calculators. But anyway, that was the only trend I saw where people just, multiplied it across. It's not quite the same. What else? Ability to track purchases. So again, this is that time of year, and I've got a business and a personal, credit card, and they send me a little thing of where all your money went. Now, again, is it perfect? They're kind of judging by what they, it has to do with what the merchant thinks they reported, what category they say they are in. But it will show me, how much was spent in restaurants, how much was spent for fuel, and those types of things. And then the ability to contest credit and debit cards. So like I say, the Fed was out today. He takes the credit cards just like I do, but now I use a system called Square. There's different plans, but the one I've got is just I don't pay any monthly fee. I just pay a percentage. So if somebody comes to me and wants to buy something, and they want to pay by check or credit card, I'll take their check because I'm selling these big panels. I'll come find them if they've written me off. Nobody has. But if I use a credit card, then I'm as the vendor, I'm paying roughly around 3%, something like that. So it doesn't sound like much, and I got to be careful with this too. If somebody looks like they're going to buy more and they're using a credit card, I'll take their credit card. I'll never refuse their credit card, even point it out. But if somebody's got either and they're standing right there, I want the check because I get all of that. So, but anyway, what he had on his little Square thing, which is different than mine. Mine was a swiper. Now they've got a new thing that does the chip. And so if you, as in this guy's case, as the vet, if he just does a swipe and the person, the customer with the card comes back and says, I never charged that, he's in a spot. I mean, he can fight with that person, but it's going to be more complex because if the chip was on the card and he didn't use it, it's a problem. Yes?
Can they charge you for that? Like if they swipe your credit card and it doesn't go through for some reason, and then you leave the whole situation, find out later that it didn't go through, and they still...
Oh, yeah. It's still a transaction. Just because there's a problem.
It doesn't go through?
If
it wasn't ever recorded?
Yeah, there's still be. They would come back to you and say, hey, your card didn't run. And I have that happen now and again. No, I haven't had it happen. I've never been that. The beauty thing is Square is it says approved, and boom, I get an email saying it. So it's on Square at that point. But I've had other people call me up, like some of the shipping companies. I'll use American Fast Freight or Pacific. Anyway, one of those folks called me up and your card, we need one of the numbers or something. And these silly Hungarian tickets, because for that thing, I had to send them a verification with a passport and all that other stuff because they're more involved. But, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Companies that are like these airline tickets, the reason why they're very cheap is because they don't have a whole lot of loss built in. Some big company that's selling tickets and they're just like, okay, we're going to lose one here or there, but they're probably not going to have the best price on the tickets because they've got, certain acceptable loss limit. These guys are not so much. So, but like if you go to some place like Walmart, for example, if your card has got the chip, they're going to insist that you put it in there because they don't want to be on the hook for the thing. I don't know whether we're going to get to the chip and pin. That's the next step, and that's the standard in Europe, where if you've got a credit card, they usually will read the card, and then you got to enter your 4-digit PIN as well.
Right.
And because this whole business of the signature, I've got 2 credit cards in my wallet right now, and they're not signed. I mean, it's stupid on my part, but the signatures kind of rub off. And not a single vendor has ever called me on and said, hey, you need to sign the card. Theoretically, they're supposed to be looking at the signature.
Yeah, they're not supposed
That
to
doesn't
sign
even
it.
happen.
It's not
And those little electronic pads, you just,
Yeah.
and you're out.
After you
So
pull it off.
the fraud, there's I don't know what their numbers are, but there's a certain acceptable loss that's probably going to be unacceptable at a certain point, and especially with the technologies there. I don't see it up here, but it seemed like a great idea. Some of these credit cards, at least back in, I think they're East Coast banks, but they actually had a picture on like a Visa card. Does anybody up here do that?
I think America had for one time. I haven't seen it in a while.
Yeah, but that seemed like a dead easy thing. I don't know why that's not happening. But anyway, so I did put that slide in here. We'll find it, but it's got those limits on there I was talking about. Disadvantages of credit, yeah, you can't overspend. May lead to loss of income. Does not increase total purchasing power. Credit costs money. It does cost money if you're not paying it off. But if you're buying a house, I don't think it's costing you money. If you've got, again, just a kind of crude example. Let's say you're putting 10% down on a house, and so you had to come up with $30,000, right? If you're getting say it's a $300,000 house. Now, not maybe this year, maybe not next year, but in standard, real estate market, prices should go up by about 3% per year on real estate. You would figure as a rule of thumb. So if you're controlling a $300,000 asset and you're making 3%, you're making what? $9,000. Your equity is being increased by $9,000 per year, and you've got this loan out there. But anyway, moving parts, you get the benefits of the tax write-off. So you're paying 3% for the loan, but it's appreciated by 3%. I mean, this only works on good quality property. If you're buying, say, mobile homes typically you can't get a mortgage for them. You can for some manufactured loans, but the banks are very reluctant to do that because they're not appreciating assets. So getting a loan on a appreciating asset is a different thing. Getting a loan on a depreciating asset, whether it be a car or just put it on a credit card, it can be pretty drastic. Cars are typically not that bad because cars, there's a pretty well-greased machine in terms of repossession. They've got some collateral out there. They've got that car that they can just come and take. And the state laws are pretty across the board throughout the whole U.S. They can, it's a pretty well-defined process. It's not like taking your home or taking something else. They'll just come take that car and they'll resell it. So they've got some security. So therefore the interest rates are low. And then also they incentivize the purchase process by, giving you very low interest rates. But credit card rates, if you're going to roll a balance, that's just whatever. You can end up in financial ruin with that. And you're only able to make the minimum payment, and it just kills you. And you've got them maxed out. Now you don't have an emergency fund because there is no, extra balance available on that credit card. That's a problem. So this defines what I was talking about between closed-end credit and open-end credit. So closed-end credit, like I said, mortgage loans, auto loans, installment loans, things that have a fixed amount, an open and a closing time, and then open credit, credit cards, some of these other ones, these American Express, Diner Club, overdraft protection, depending on how it's worked. But it makes a difference. As a general rule, closed-end credit is is typically going to have a lower interest rate. So open ed, yeah, all those bank cards. Again, you can go down that route if maybe, if you're somebody who shops at, say, Kohl's or something like that, or maybe in Home Depot, I've got one of their cards because for big projects, they give you whatever, 2 years sometimes to pay it off. If it makes sense, if it's financially worthwhile, but for the most part, and we'll talk about this in the second part in terms of credit reports and the rest of it, I don't like to have a lot of extra credit cards in there. Just makes your wallet too fat, and it gives you more opportunities for some sort of identity theft type thing. You've got more accounts that you need to verify each month that are not being basically tampered with. So the credit cards, yep, 8 out of 10 have them. So one third of convenience people who pay the balance each month, and then 2/3 are the people that are, rolling it over, and that's where they make the money. If you do get those things, well, they look like checks, or if you take a cash advance on a credit card, that's when things really start to kick in. If that whole notion of the grace period, let's say you need, $1,000 or something, and you put it on your credit card as a cash advance, or you use one of those things that looks like a check but are not really checks, all those grace periods are out to lunch. The interest starts the day you start doing it. It's some of the most expensive credit you can get, so try not to do that. The co-branding, yep, you'll see that with again certain companies, and again I've done it sometimes. I mean, I can't remember the hotel group, but I got 30,000 free miles for signing up. I took one trip, canceled the card, and it was good. I mean, but again, you have to be disciplined. It's like enrolling in a free membership that's a trial membership, and if you don't cancel it, all of a sudden you're a member. That's how those credit things work. You want to try and avoid that unless you're very, very diligent. All you got to do is screw up once, though, and you've lost everything. Smart cards are an embedded computer chip, so that's becoming, standardized. The law, you're going to see that. And then debit cards, we know how those work, just like writing a check. But the downside is they're even harder to keep track of because you don't have the same credit card register.
Can I ask, how is the chip safer? I mean, how does that protect them? It's the same person swiping the card and they're swiping the card. What's the difference?
I don't know. Do you know on the security features? I might look at that over the break because, I know for, I was watching a couple of the fraud videos, in that technology to do the magnetic strip that's dead easy.
Yeah.
Where the guy, he's got a reader, boop, and he's got a writer, and it's just like a cassette.
We do gas cards
Yeah.
at one of our facilities, and it is easy to read a card and then read a code card.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what you're
Yeah, I think so, because I've got one that, I still do a bunch of classified work for the military, and they've got the same sort of system, and they've got it on the secure side too. It's just it's harder to replicate. Yeah, but I'll double check to make sure that we're right. So sign the new cards when they arrive. Like I say, it's if I ever saw somebody check the signature, I'd have a little bit more confidence in them. I don't. Treat them like money, kind of, sort of. Certainly, if it's a store, like if it's a one of the things where, like, say you return something like the Lowe's or whatever, if you lose this, it is literally like cash. In fact, if I don't know what would happen. The one time it did get damaged, I got nothing back. I might have been able to find it, but it was only a couple bucks. Shred anything with the account number on it. That's gotten far easier now. Typically now you very rarely see anything other than your card with the whole account number on it. They've gotten much smarter about that. And, the whole notion of all these carbons and other things going out there. The threats change all the time. Electronically, you're much more vulnerable. But the paper dumpster diver threat, I think, is probably diminished just because it's easier to get the stuff electronically now. Don't give her the number over the phone unless you initiate the call. And you guys get a lot of this practice every day with all the spam that comes on the UAA system, where people out of the blue want you to give them information. That's not the way it works. You know, you call a number that you know. If you've ever seen, even on the URL addresses on a computer, you can spoof those to make it look official, but there's usually something in there. But anyway, just don't be stupid. Get card and receipt after every transaction. Compare the receipts to the bill when they arrive. That's a good practice, but the main thing, if nothing else, go through that statement. It's so easy to find the thing. It's usually like the Apple Store or Apple this. You know, people, at least for me, or some bogus Walmart. I mean, you'll just look at your credit card statement and you go, I don't remember going there. And but again, if you're waiting for the statement to arrive, the paper statement, the damage may have already been done. You know, you need to kind of look at it online as well, at least probably some point during the month. Notify the issuer. They're very helpful in terms of lost or stolen cards. They will shut things down pretty quickly. And like I said, even if you misplaced it, you can just put a hold on it and keep it from being canceled. That's something. If it is lost or stolen, you call Experian. You call one of the credit agencies and get the thing shut down. That's kind of like a global approach. That's a fairly drastic approach. But if you truly have a problem, that will work. And then the credit report. So the deal with these credit reports is, I mean, there's money to be made. The credit reporting agencies, there's three of them, Experian, TransUnion, and anyway, we'll go through all three. But they are forced through the FTC to give you credit reports. Now, they aren't forced to give you the credit score, which is a proprietary calculation on their part. The credit score is kind of useful to know what your credit score is, but I'm not willing to pay for it. And if I've denied credit, I can get access to that number anyway. On my bank, for example, it actually has my credit score listed, and it kind of recalculates it each time, and it tells me why it's such, whether it could be higher or lower. You know, a lot of times it has to do, if I put something big on a credit card, I'll say, your credit score has been lowered, you know, slightly due to your credit card being near maximum amount, which I'm fine. I'm paying it off anyway. But anyway, so if you're interested in, and you should be, in getting your credit report, generally, my advice is to use this address here. But the big part is, even if you forget this part, if you type in free credit score or free credit report, you're going to be overwhelmed with all these paid sites. They may be free at first, but they're going to transfer to a subscription. But if you go through sort of the FTC portal, you'll see the actual free credit reports that are genuinely free. And like I say, you get access to them once a year, but there's 3 bureaus out there, so you could do this 3 times if you wanted. Also, if somebody shuts you down for credit, if you get denied credit, you have, you know, as part of why did I get disapproved, you can get another credit report. So, not that you want to do it continually, but let me just copy that down for a sec. Because we'll go to this site in just a second. I'll show you what it's like. It's not that difficult, but it is, it's part of the federal law where you as a consumer have access to it. You also have access to make inputs and other things to your credit report if there's some exceptional, reason. Or is anybody going to read it? Is anybody going to care? Maybe not, but at least you can kind of speak your piece on that. So we talked that. I'm going to get rid of this thing. Okay. Making purchases online. These guys are maybe not as up to speed as useful, but yeah, you should look up there in the browser line and see the HTTPS on there. Records of online transactions. A lot of times screenshot, PDF, if you don't get an email with it. But the monthly statements, you can do that quicker than the cyclical, where they send you the paper copies. Privacy fraud. Again, you know, I'd be lying to you if I said I read every one of those agreements on Amazon, but you know, I'm sort of trusting that I've never had any problems with Amazon, but I you know, it's something, due diligence, you should read through it. Personal information, businesses you don't trust, never give out password, don't download files software strange. So a lot of these things, you know, if you're going to buy a lot of stuff online, for example, anybody who uses stuff on eBay, you know there's things out there. There's like PayPal and other services that are fairly squared away. You're not trading, you know, bank account information. Whether it be Craigslist, eBay, any of those, anybody who asks for a wire transfer is 99%, they are ripping you off. So wire transfers, they have purposes, money orders have purposes, but in online transactions, that's a pretty solid indication that this person is shady. So, but PayPal is often done, but again, I sell a lot of stuff on Craigslist, and that's usually an out-of-state number, and you know they're going to give me full price, but when you read the details, for some reason I'm supposed to send them money first. Like, really? I'm selling something. I'm not. Anyway, you know, you have to have some common sense. And sometimes it's fun to play with them. You go back and forth. You can see their languages. You know, they're clearly in Nigeria, and they think they got one, and you know, you're wasting their time. I did this with a Corvette one time, and it was a phenomenal price. It was in Italy. I was up in Germany, and anyway, I got the vehicle identification number from the guy because I said, I think I'm going to buy this, you know. And so he gave me the VIN. I put it in Google. It showed up in an ad someplace else. I sent the guy an email. I said, you know, the car's for sale, you know. And it turns out that the car was still in this guy's garage. I mean, this guy was basically a lazy thief that he was selling stuff he didn't even own. He was too lazy to even steal the stuff to resell it. He was just taking title. Anyway, if you're, we could spend days on that kind of stuff. It just comes down to common sense. Travel and entertainment cards, you know, there's Diners Club. For some reason, you know, with different companies I've worked for, they forced me to get these things. Even Amex, even American Express, I put in this category. What can it do for me that the other ones can't? Other than it's not accepted everywhere when I really need it, and you know, they won't allow the balance sometimes to roll over, or they have an annual fee. There's many reasons not to have it, but anyway, if you're doing it for status, that's a problem. American Express does have some other cards, some other products that, you know, do allow you to roll the balance, but anyway, I just don't. It's a competitive world out there. Unless they're better than the card you have in your pocket, there's no need to have 3 or 4 cards when you can just have one. So store value, gift cards, yeah, look like a debit card. They use them, you know, many times they use them returns. But anyway, if the company goes bankrupt like Circuit City did, you know, and that wasn't quite out of the blue, but but anyway, I know some people who had some gift cards for Circuit City, and you go from having a gift card to being a creditor, and a creditor with only a small amount of cash, and you have to get in line with the other creditors. Everybody else who's owed money by Circuit City is now in that same group, so it's just not a good place to be. So, not a big fan. We'll talk about this, and then we'll take a little bit of a break. Home equity loans. Now, if you do have a need for buying something, some intermediate kind of expense, depends on the equity you have in your home. Equity in your home means, let's say you bought your home for $300,000, and you've owned this home for 10, 15 years. Well, you've paid off a big chunk of that $300,000, so you've got some equity. Or if the market's screaming, you bought this home for $300,000, and by 5 months into it, say the market's appreciated by 10%, you actually have $330,000 home. So you've got $30,000 worth of equity that you could potentially take a loan against. The good news about that is, it can be used like revolving credit, but the tax deductibility of the interest, because it's mortgage interest. Credit card, these guys took a beating, That's been 10, 15 years ago now, but credit card interest used to be deductible. That went away. Now, you can be pretty certain that the deductibility of mortgage interest is not going to go away. They've got a much stronger lobby, much more people involved in it, and the desirability of owning real estate would be diminished a bit if they got rid of that tax deductibility of homes. So that's probably not going anywhere, and that is a very good deal for you. So anyway, let's take a break for about 10 minutes. I'll look up that thing on the chips, and then we'll move on. That link I had for Vice, that remember we were talking last week? Let me show you what I downloaded, see if I got the right one. Where is it? Because I was looking at that. Did I stop it?